What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 4040 Vision podcast. I am your host, Khaled Abdallah, and I'm joined today by my fellow host, Osama Dahud. What's up, man? How are you?
Good, man. How's it going?
It's going well. I'm also joined by my other co-host, Sulman Haque. How's it going, man?
Yo, what's going on, man?
Not much, not much. So today we are doing a redraft of the top 15 picks in the 2014 NBA draft. We used to just do the lottery, but because of this new format, we decided to switch it up and make it an odd number, and you'll see why. So this is an incredible draft. It's got a ton of talent all the way through, and there's at least, I want to say, 20 or 25 guys worthy of being lottery picks, including maybe some undrafted guys too. And we're going to do the same format as our last redraft, where Osama and Sulman each make their selections, and I pick which of the two I like better. And at the end, we'll crown a winner. And that's the reason we went with a odd number this time, because last time we ended up in a tie, and nobody likes ties unless you're playing soccer. And even then, you don't really like it that much. So we'll go ahead and we'll start with the first pick in the draft, and that was Andrew Wiggins, guard out of Kansas, who went first overall to the Cleveland Cavaliers. And this pick was traded for to Minnesota in exchange for Kevin Love and a couple other things. So we'll start with Osama. Who did you have the Cleveland Cavaliers / Minnesota Timberwolves picking here?
Yeah, right. Basically the pick here, it's who do you have the Cavs trading to build the new big three from LeBron James's move from Miami back to Cleveland. Yeah, there's a couple guys you could go. There's only two you could go here. I went with the Joker, Nikola Jokic. I thought this was a no-brainer, an all-time talent already. Chris Paul is a 7-footer, basically, and he was such an unknown at the time. When he was drafted, it was during a Taco Bell commercial, as his name scrolled on the bottom. He wasn't announced by, I think it was Adam Silver already at the time. I think he'd taken over for the former, for David Stern. So, yeah, I mean, he gets traded for LeBron James's return, but either way, it would have been super impactful in Minnesota. Would have been a different look than Andrew Wiggins, who took a bit of time to find his footing. So this is a no-brainer. I mean, this is a future Hall of Famer. He's on the verge of being a possible 3-time back-to-back MVP. He's an incredible player.
Yeah, I agree with you here, Osama. I also went Nikola Jokic, and maybe he doesn't get traded, right, because of his talent and his ability to shoot the three ball. Maybe he does all those things. But they'd have to wait some time to get that return on the Joker here. So maybe he does end up as a Timberwolf. But yeah, same pick for me here, Nikola Jokic.
It's hard to argue with that selection. I leaned a little bit towards Embiid, but I think because of the injury history and the fact that it took him, 3 years to get really started in the NBA, you have to go with the Joker, who is looking like an all-time great, and probably will be by the time he's done. He's only 27 years old, and he leads this draft class not in points, which was surprising, but in rebounds and assists, neither of which are surprising given the rest of the type of players that were drafted after him. So I think this is a really interesting thought exercise. I definitely think Cleveland still trades the pick to get Kevin Love because it's LeBron and he wants to win now, and he has no patience to develop a guy like Jokic. So it takes Minnesota on a really different trajectory where they end up with, Jokic instead of Karl Anthony Towns, and then what do they become eventually, and what does he become? Because he's shown that he can still transcend the small market and still become a great player, and maybe Minnesota just takes a different trajectory in their status as a contender. So, all right. So I mean, you guys both get the point. So we got one each. So we're tied up here, and I think after this, maybe you guys will start to vary a little bit given the rest of the picks. So we'll go. The second overall pick belonged to the Milwaukee Bucks, and they selected small forward Jabari Parker out of Duke. So, Sulman, who did you have Milwaukee selecting here?
I have them taking Joel Embiid. I mean, this is basically the top two guys are Jokic and Embiid here. And so if you took Jokic 1, Embiid has to go 2. He's a 5-time All-Star, 4-time All-NBA second team. He's 3-time All-NBA defensive second team. He led the league in scoring in 2022. So, just overall, he's a He's a beast of a player. He has, pretty well-rounded guy, both an offensive game, defensive game. And the Bucks here were starting guys like John Henson, Larry Sanders, and these type of guys. And can you just imagine the pick and roll game between Embiid and Giannis? And man, that would have been nasty. Maybe there's a little bit of a fit issue in terms of spacing, but Joel can hit that three as well. He's a career 33.9% shooter from the 3-point range, and he's got that mid range there too, where he shoots over about 45% from there as well. So really, really good fit here with Giannis, and really propels the Bucks here.
Yep, I took Joel Embiid as well. It's pretty amazing. This is an interesting what if, because he's going to be hurt when he gets there for a couple of years. Their Bucks are going to stink anyway. They're going to get Giannis anyway. And you have arguably the scariest front court duo of all time. And when Jason Kidd gets there, he starts Giannis at point guard, and he becomes a triple-double machine night in, night out with Joel Embiid. This would have been just incredible. And that fit with Giannis and whoever else they end up bringing totally changes the outlook of the NBA. He ended up only going a spot earlier because of how amazing of a talent he was, and it was that clear. He was an incredible player. Bucks would get Embiid here.
So I lean that way, of course. But the question that I had is, does Embiid coming to Milwaukee impact the development of Giannis? Does it? Because, we saw, I don't want to kind of blaspheme against Giannis and say that he's kind of like Ben Simmons, but in a way he kind of is, right? In the ideal version of Ben Simmons is Giannis, right? He's that point forward. He can guard 1 through 5. He can distribute. You put Ben Simmons on a court with 4 shooters, just like you put Giannis on a court with 4 shooters. So is there a fit question? Is there a fit issue with Giannis and Embiid? I know talent can probably overcome all, and we know Giannis is 100 times mentally tougher than Ben Simmons, but is there a fit issue with these guys on the court? I'll ask Sulman since you went first.
I would say maybe a little bit, but we've seen Embiid, right? He can hit the mid range. He can space the floor a little bit. Given that Embiid was hurt early on, maybe Giannis still gets that development going, and he still gets his confidence up. And then they start running these pick and rolls. Embiid can space the floor. He's a pretty good mid range shooter for a center, and so I don't think it's as questionable of a fit as, like, say you put like a very traditional big man like Clint Capella down there with them, right? The fact that Embiid can shoot, it makes it a little bit of an easier fit, I feel.
Osama, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Giannis is Ben Simmons, but with that dog in him, right? That's who Giannis is. If Ben Simmons had a dog in him, I think it accelerates his development. Not only did Jason Kidd play a part in it, but when you play with a great player like Embiid, Giannis seems like the type of guy that would be up for that. That would be like, hell yeah, I'm going to play even better for this guy. He's a great player. I know in my mind I'm an amazing player. I think that nothing changes except maybe you see that hint of greatness earlier in his career.
I got you. Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like we kind of see a poor man's version of what Embiid does with Brook Lopez, with that size, that rim protection, and Brook Lopez reinvented himself later in his career as more of a shooter than your traditional big man. So I can see it. I see the vision. And, of course, Embiid gets to play with a guy like Giannis, who is very similar to Jimmy Butler in terms of his mentality and his attitude. And I think Embiid really fed off that. And I think that's why he struggled so much with Simmons, is because the attitude was the biggest issue. So you guys are both 2 for 2 at this point. So we were tied at 2 each. And we'll move on to our next pick. And one thing I noticed about this draft is there's so many awesome nicknames for these guys. Jabari Parker doesn't have a nickname, but Andrew Wiggins, he's got Maple Jordan, the talent, two-way Wiggs. And then, of course, the 3rd overall pick, which you guys mentioned already, went to the Philadelphia 76ers, and that is Joel the Process Embiid, center out of Kansas. So Embiid is off the board for both of you guys. So, Osama, who did you have the Sixers taking during this process era?
Yeah, there were about like 3 guys, maybe 4 guys, like kind of rotated while trying to figure this out. But I went with Young Hollywood, a.k.a. Flight 8, known as Zach LaVine at number 3. I don't know if Sulman picked one out. We'll find out in a second. But I went with Zach LaVine because, his stint with the Bulls has been great enough to make him worthy at this point. He's shown an incredible offensive game. Defensively, he can get better, but I think his scoring ability more than makes up for it. And you look at who Philly picked here, they were looking for a franchise player. They were looking for someone who can carry them a bit, and they needed something. They needed to show something for tanking intentionally, right, to get in this position in the first place. I think he would have given them a scoring punch and would have been a great start to that tanking to the top for the process.
Yep. I also went Zach LaVine here. Again, all the things you said, right? Great talent, great offensive player. He's second in this draft class in terms of career points per game at 20.1, just ahead of Nikola Jokic and behind Embiid. So again, another dynamic player here, super athletic guy that they could start instead of maybe say a 34-year-old Jason Richardson, who was playing for them at this time. So Zach LaVine is the smart pick here for sure.
Wow. Okay, I definitely did not expect that. But when I was doing my research, I also had them picking Zach LaVine. I leaned possibly Marcus Smart because I know they needed a point guard. I think they were starting Ish Smith at this point, or I could be wrong. And then they eventually started Ish Smith and TJ McConnell and a whole laundry list of point guards. Both of you guys get this point here. Zach LaVine is an interesting case in situation, and how that can determine basically the trajectory of your career. His career has taken an interesting path because of obviously started Minnesota, got traded for essentially Jimmy Butler to Chicago, and he's become the best player on a mediocre team, I think is fair to say. So I think we're all waiting for him to take that next step from really good player on a so-so team to a great player on a good team. And maybe in Philadelphia, he gets to do that. And then Philadelphia probably doesn't waste a couple picks later on guys like Julia Okafor, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's really fascinating to go down that path. All right. So 3 for 3, tied again. So hopefully we'll get some variance here. We'll see. So neither of you guys know who, just to be clear, they don't know who each other is picking. So they're all a mystery. So with the 4th overall pick, the Orlando Magic picked Aaron Gordon, a.k.a. Air Gordon, power forward out of Arizona. So, Sulman, who did you have the Magic picking here?
I had them going here with Julius Randle. So it was clear the Magic kind of needed this dynamic power forward, but I feel Randle might be a better fit here. He's top 4 in points scored in this class, also top 3 here in rebounds. He's a one-time second-team All-Pro here in the NBA, and then an All-Star in 2021. So I think his career it's pretty interesting, but he had a rebirth here with the Knicks, and I think he comes in and contributes right away over guys like Kyle O'Quinn, Channing Frye. The defensive pairing here with Nikola Vucevic would be a little bit questionable, but man, that would be one hell of an offensive front court there for the Magic. And, Randall is just a little bit, more of a better scorer and things like that versus Aaron Gordon. So I went with Julius Randle here.
I went here with Andrew Wiggins, a.k.a. Maple Jordan, a.k.a. Two-Way Wiggs, a.k.a. The Prospect, et cetera, et cetera. And I picked him here because he always showed promising talent during his time in Minnesota. I mean, it's why he went number 1 overall. It was clear that there was a great player in there somewhere. He didn't show it early on, but I think we've seen the pinnacle of him at Golden State. He showed he can be a formidable two-way player defending the other team's best player like a Luka Doncic or a Jason Tatum while still being a vulture on the offensive boards and picking his spots to score. He could really light it up when he finds his groove. We've seen his potential, and I really value that impact. So I think he belongs up here when he can lock in defensively. He is an elite talent, and I think maybe he doesn't show it early enough, but we know who he is now. It's kind of what pegged Julius Randle down a bit for me is sometimes he does this boneheaded shit like run at defenders and take these contested shots, and he takes a lot of mid-range jumpers, and his arms are really short. He looks like an alligator a little bit. So that's why I went with Wiggins here.
I remember last podcast you guys accused me and slandered me of being leaning towards Warriors and ex-Warriors, so Warriors bias. And in this case, you will find the complete opposite. I'm actually going to go with Julius Randle. That's who I thought was the best fit here. The issue that I have with Wiggins, I think everyone has, is effort and maturity. And I think if he goes to a team like Orlando that didn't know how to use Aaron Gordon, that seems to waste careers, maybe not so much anymore. They're starting to turn that around. My concern is that he just falls into that same habits that he had in Minnesota, where he's putting up numbers, he's scoring a ton of points. I think he's the leading scorer in this class by a good 700 points. So that's my main concern, is his career goes to waste there. But I think Randall, he does some of the things that Aaron Gordon does, but he's a little more versatile. He can create a little bit more. He's more of a polished scorer, especially in his Knicks years. So I'm going to go with Sulman getting the point here for Julius Randle. Any rebuttals here now that we finally have some variance? We'll start with you, Osama. What do you think?
Wiggins is going to get moved regardless, and he's going to get moved to a place like, I don't know, a Boston or a Golden State or something like that to really tap his potential. But because for me, we've seen it when you can be a 16-team player. That's why I ranked him higher. I don't think Julius Randle is, but he is a good player.
I don't think he's had the chance to do that. That's the difference. He's been on some bad teams. Maybe some of that is his fault. But anyway, all right, we'll move on to the 5th overall pick. The Utah Jazz selected point guard Dante Exum. Osama, who did you have the Jazz picking here?
I had the Jazz picking Julius Randle here. We know he's a volume ISO player, all-star caliber player. This would have been a great place for him to start his career. I think his defense would have been developed a bit more in Utah. They are really good at that. They have a great system, great development staff. I think he takes a big leap a lot earlier in his career than when he got to the Knicks, and more so than he would have in Orlando. So I think this is a really good spot for him.
I ended up going here with Marcus Smart, actually, and again, thought about Andrew Wiggins here as well, but the Jazz had Gordon Hayward and Joe Ingles on the roster, and clearly they needed a point guard, and Marcus Smart is that defensive stopper that they could put in here with Gordon Hayward. They could play him next to Trey Burke, and he can defend, any of those guard spots. He could defend the 3, the 4. So Marcus Smart, he doesn't put up a lot of, flashy stats, but he gets the job done, especially on the defensive end. And he was Defensive Player of the Year in 2022, and he's a 3-time All-NBA Defensive First Team for the last 3 years. So I think the pairing of Marcus Smart here with Gordon Hayward, and maybe Hayward, that convinces Hayward to stick around as they're adding more pieces, and you have Rudy Gobert coming in here, just really powers the Jazz and gives them a nice little team there to go forward with.
I'm going to go once again with Sulman's pick. So I actually had Marcus Smart circled here. Once again, I do not like him as a player. I think he's dirty, but he's a great player. In the same breath, I can't take away from what he does on the court. When he's not trying to jack up threes, he's a winning player. He's a great defender, especially at his position. And I think he fits in really well with this Jazz team. I considered Wiggins, but for the same reasons that you mentioned, Sulman, they already had Gordon Hayward. And, he probably could have played the 2 instead of Rodney Hood, but I don't know if that may have been a weird fit for him. So I think when you have Marcus Smart and Rudy Gobert, for all the jokes that we make about Rudy, I think it would have made for a great defensive team. And Utah is already known for being disciplined and well-coached, and I think he fits in perfectly with that culture. So, Osama, you just lost 2 in a row. What's your rebuttal here?
Highly disagree with this pick. That's my that's my. Marcus Smart struggled to score offensively in the league. I think that if he was on any other team besides Boston, he would struggle quite a bit. I think that he's just a good fit for the Celtics and his development. That's just me. I think that there's a lot of players that if he wasn't drafted by the Celtics, would have gone ahead. I don't know where we would have seen him in the league if he wasn't on that incredible development staff in Boston. So that's why I didn't pick him here.
I think we know who you're going to pick next then. So with the 6th overall pick, the Boston Celtics selected point guard Marcus Smart out of Oklahoma State, whose nickname apparently is Wolverine or Cobra. Never heard that one. I personally would have gone with like Green Goblin or something because he does have the green hair and he plays on a green team. So that makes sense to me. So, Sulman, who did you have the Celtics picking since Marcus Smart is off the board for you?
Yeah, with Marcus Smart off here, I went Clint Capella. The Celtics had Kelly Olynyk, Tyler Zeller on the roster, but you look at Capella here, he's number 2 in rebounds in this class. He's number 3 in the value over replacement player stat here. And I think, Boston could have really just benefited from a defensive-minded center here. And Capella is a guy who would come in, solidify the rotation for him. He has career averages of like 12 points per game, 11.7 rebounds per game, and 1.4 blocks per game. Another option for me here was Wiggins, but if you look at the Celtics roster, they were just a ton of small forward shooting guard, not really great ones, but just so many mediocre ones that I decided to go with center here versus Andrew Wiggins.
I went with Marcus Smart here in Boston, one of the best defenders at his position in the last, 10 years or so, 15 years. Heart and soul of the Celtics defense that they've been formidable from the day he was drafted. Doesn't matter who you put next to him. Put little Isaiah Thomas, who fit in most opposition's belly buttons. It doesn't really matter. They're still have been an incredible defense with him on the roster. He was born to be a Celtic. There's just no other way. He's a Celtic lifer. This is just fate. This is destiny. Don't pick Sulman.
I completely agree. I mean, there's some guys that just fit with the team. It's just a perfect marriage from the start. It fits with the team culture, the fans. Even though I'm pretty sure for a long time, at the beginning of last season, especially until they went on that crazy win streak in the second half, a lot of fans and writers and bloggers wanted them to trade away Marcus Smart. So he redeemed himself, became the Defensive Player of the Year, and was one of the main catalysts for them making it to the finals because I think he finally recognized his role on that team. He still can't dribble all that well. He's not a traditional point guard, not someone that you would trust with running your offense, but he fits perfectly with that team. On the subject of Capella, I did consider him here. I think the Celtics have been looking for that secondary big man for a long time, and I was really surprised that he's, I think second in VORP and second in win shares, but I wonder how much of that has to do with just playing on those Rockets teams that were just racking up regular season wins like candy. I don't know. I do like Capella as a player, but I think the fit here for Marcus Smart is just too perfect. And also, Mon, you already picked him, so you couldn't pick him again. But I do think Wiggins was a good choice here as well. But like you said, they were pretty backed up when it came to small forwards and wings and stuff. But any rebuttals, Sulman?
No, it's fair. It's fair. Marcus Smart is probably the better fit here, but he was off the board for me. And I just didn't quite see the Wiggins fit here with all those small forwards and shooting guards they had on the roster. So fair, I'll take it.
I mean, clearly they weren't good enough because they went Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum the next couple of drafts.
Yeah, many years later. Yeah.
That was a weird team, that Celtics team, 15-16. There was Tayshaun Prince was on there for a while. Evan Turner.
It was really weird. It was really weird. Yeah.
It's surprising that they won 40 games, but I guess shout out Brad Stevens. All right. So the 7th overall pick was with the Los Angeles Lakers. They selected power forward Julius Randle out of Kentucky. His nicknames are Don Julio and Orange Julius. I really like Don Julio. That's a cool one. So, Osama, who did you have the Lakers taking here 7th overall?
I went Clint Capella here. I think he was a traditional big man drafted by what would become a really three-point happy shooting team in the Rockets, and he played behind Dwight Howard in the beginning, yet he was still incredibly effective as a rim protector, as a rim runner rolling to the basket. He's elite at that. He's gone on to prove that in Atlanta as well. This incarnation of the Lakers had an aging Kobe Bryant. Their only starting center was Jordan Hill, who we know didn't really work out, even as a lottery pick. He didn't have a whole lot of competition at center. Carlos Boozer was a 12-year veteran in the league at this point, playing at power forward. So I think he would have been impactful here as well. So this would have been a great fit for him.
My pick here is Andrew Wiggins. He's another talented guy. Just wasn't worth the number one pick here, but he is a one-time All-Star and was Rookie of the Year in the 2014-2015 season. He also is number one in this draft class in terms of total points. I think he really found his stride here with the Warriors, where he had proper mentorship and they really made him focus on both sides of the ball. So I think, coming in here with the Lakers, with the soon-to-retire Kobe Bryant, may he rest in peace, he gets a little bit of mentorship here and maybe gives the Lakers a solid core to move forward, as in the next couple of drafts they go D'Angelo Russell and Brandon Ingram. And my pick here is Andrew Wiggins for those reasons.
I think it could have gone one of two ways with Wiggins in this situation. I mean, obviously he gets to be on the team with Kobe, and he can get that mentorship and basically take the winning approach to basketball and understanding the dedication that it takes to be a winning player. Or he kind of ignores everything that Kobe says, takes like the Kwame Brown route where he's just beaten down by the criticism. I think Kobe was at a different stage in his career. I don't think he was quite as harsh as he probably would have been earlier in his career. So I do think it does help Wiggins' long-term career trajectory. I do like Capella as a fit here. I think the following year their starting centers were Roy Hibbert and Tariq Black and Robert Sacre. So with all that said, I do think Wiggins is the pick here because he has the higher ceiling to Capella. He is a player that perhaps in the right situation is someone that you can build on. He was the Warriors' second best player on the title team last year. So in the right situation, I think Wiggins gets the nod here. Osama, what do you say?
It's hard to argue with it. He's fallen pretty far down the list here, and I had him a lot higher, so it's a good pick.
All right. So we'll move on to the 8th overall pick, and that is the Sacramento Kings selecting shooting guard Nick Stauskas out of Michigan, whose nickname is Sauce Castillo. Never would have thought. He's, just to be clear, Nick Stauskas is the whitest of the white. Go to Sixers games when he was on the team a couple years later. People would have posters of the Tapatio guy, except it was Nick Stauskas' face on it. So it made no sense to me. I should have looked it up, but it's a great nickname and just another one of the great nicknames on this list. But anyway, Sulman, who did you have the Kings picking here, 8th overall?
I went Jordan Clarkson here for the Sacramento Kings. It was clear they needed a shooting guard. They had Ben McLemore, but they were clearly looking for something more, right? And Clarkson had a pretty good rookie season here with the Lakers, where he made the All-Rookie first team, and then maybe his career trajectory took a little bit of a slide, and then he revived himself here with the Utah Jazz, carved out a nice sixth man Lou Williams type role here, where he just comes in and he scores a bunch of buckets. He won the Sixth Man Award in 2021. And you look at Clarkson this season, he's averaging 21 points in about 32 minutes a game. And so he's a guy who just really brings that scoring punch the Kings were looking for. And that's who I had him taking here over Sauce Castillo.
I went with Aaron Gordon here. Aaron Gordon, really solid defensive player, really talented athletic offensive player too. That would have been an immediate contributor on this team that had a bunch of injury-prone, not very talented forwards. I think some of these guys would have gotten cut, like a Jason Thompson, a David Ware, Derek Williams. These guys weren't really that good. Aaron Gordon, was a really incredible talent. And it's hard with the Kings. You just don't know if they're really going to keep any of the guys that they draft. I think he would have played with DeMarcus Cousins, whether at this point or a little bit later. That would have been pretty interesting. So I really like Aaron Gordon here.
This was a tough one. I can see the cases for both. I think Clarkson makes sense on this team because they do need some scoring. They do need some creation. They wasted the pick of Ben McLemore, who hasn't ended up being very good. And, of course, Nick Stauskas wasn't very good either. But I am going to lean towards Aaron Gordon. I think he is a more talented player than Jordan Clarkson. I think he's a little more versatile. I think it would be an interesting fit with him next to DeMarcus Cousins. It would have given them an interesting front line. But I do think the mobility of Gordon would have been a little more fun, and kind of the athleticism and versatility that he brings. So it was close. I definitely understand the need for both guys, but I think Aaron Gordon, if you use him properly, can give you a little more than Jordan Clarkson. So, Sulman, what do you think?
I can see that. Though I do wonder, how well the Kings do develop Aaron Gordon, especially with them focusing a little bit on DeMarcus Cousins, who ends up being pretty unhappy there in Sacramento. So, but it's a fair pick there.
Yeah, and I think if we're talking about development, I mean, Jordan Clarkson was the 46th overall pick.
Yeah, that's fair. Yes.
So, he's definitely not the same guy that he was. His career has taken an interesting couple turns as well. But yeah, I think Aaron Gordon, there's a more linear path to getting a productive NBA player out of those two guys. So we'll move on to the 9th overall pick. The Charlotte Hornets selected power forward Noah Vonleh out of Indiana. He does not have a cool nickname. Osama, who did you have the Hornets picking here?
Yeah, I just think they picked the wrong big guy. They should have taken Jusuf Nurkic here, a really talented offensive big, real difference maker. Although health was an issue for him, and it has been, I don't think they really knew that back then. They had a really great playoff run. He would have been so impactful at the time against the Miami Heat. They had a really great run. Steve Clifford, an incredible coach. At the time, he was seen as a great player developer under the Greg Popovich tree. More than a complimentary piece, you get a really good starting center here.
I went with Jeremy Grant, actually. So it was clear the Hornets were looking for a power forward. They had Marvin Williams on the roster, but Noah Vonleh wasn't exactly the answer here, and Jeremy Grant would have been an excellent fit here in this spot. It took him some time to get his career going. He bounced around from the 76ers to OKC to the Nuggets, where he started showing flashes, and then he got to Detroit and he really, lit it up. He was averaging 22 points per game and 5 rebounds that season while shooting 35% from threes. And then look at what he's doing now on the Blazers this season. He's averaging 21.6 points per game while shooting 43% from the three. And so Jeremy Grant is just a guy you can plug in at power forward. He's really that kind of stretch forward type of dude. He gives you some scoring, some defense, and it's just a really good shooter. And that's why I went with Jeremy Grant here for the Hornets.
I get it. I think I like the player that Jeremy Grant has become, but I think it's taken him a little bit too long to get started, as opposed to Nurkic, who was pretty much a contributor right away to those Denver teams. They kind of had that two towers approach with him and Jokic, and they obviously had to choose one over the other, and they definitely made the right choice. He has had injury issues. I think a lot of those were, I want to say, like impact injuries. They weren't necessarily like muscle injuries. Maybe I'm misremembering, but I definitely prefer Nurkic as a player. Maybe if you told me now who I would prefer, it'd definitely be Jeremy Grant. But I think at the time, given the fact that we're talking almost 8 years later, I think you get a lot more out of Nurkic initially than you would have out of Grant. So what do you think, Sulman?
I would say probably when it's all said and done, Grant has the better career than Nurkic. Like we're seeing Nurkic slow down a lot, and he's 8 years in, and Grant is just kind of finding his stride. But yeah, I mean when it's all said and done, maybe. But yeah, to your point, Nurkic contributes right away for them.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we'll move on to the 10th overall pick, where the Philadelphia 76ers, essentially picking for the Orlando Magic because they traded this pick. They select point guard Elfrid Payton out of Louisiana. I thought he had a nickname, but I guess not. Maybe with that hair, that's just enough. I
think maybe they call him like
for
Elf for short, but that's about it.
Elf, that's not a good nickname. So, Sulman, who did you have the Philadelphia 76ers, a.k.a. the Orlando Magic, picking here?
Yeah, I thought point guard was the right idea here. I went with Spencer Dinwiddie, and he's just a little bit better of a fit versus Elfrid Payton because of his, Elfrid Payton couldn't really shoot, but Dinwiddie is a much better shooter who, currently this season is shooting 40% from three. And I think he would have been a great fit here next to Vucevic and Oladipo, and now in my world, Julius Randle. And you've given this Magic team a really solid core here. And so I thought Spencer Dinwiddie would have been a better fit here versus Elfrid Payton.
I went with Jeremy Grant here. I think, his ability to play on both ends of the floor, a solid defender, he can stretch, he can play the three or the four. He's probably the last player on this list that would be, especially in today's NBA, a huge number three on a title team now that we've kind of seen his development. This is a really good pick here for the Magic. Whether he develops here or not so important. It does take him some time, but as we can see now, a very much relevant player in today's NBA.
Do you have any concerns with the fit of, I believe you picked Zach LaVine earlier. I'm sorry, no, you picked Andrew Wiggins earlier. Do you have any concerns with kind of doubling up there? I mean, I know Grant is more of a power forward, but do you have any concerns with that?
I think wings come at such a premium. It's really good to have wing depth. Point guards come and go all the time. Spencer Dinwiddie was a bit of a journeyman too, and we're really far down in the lottery now. So I think that depth is super important. That's why I liked him here.
That's totally fair, and I think a couple interesting stats. I mean, Jeremy Grant has, about 2,000 more points, or about 1,500 more points in his career than Spencer Dinwiddie, which I thought was curious. And then, of course, rebounds, he has considerably more. And then assists, obviously, Spencer Dinwiddie will have a lot more than Jeremy Grant, given the position that he plays. But I do think that Jeremy Grant is a reasonable facsimile to Aaron Gordon, who they had on this team. And I think it gives them a really interesting team the following year if you ended up with Wiggins and Grant, because you have a really interesting front court with Tobias Harris, Vucevic, Wiggins, Grant, Fournier is in there too, and then you throw Oladipo, and all of a sudden that becomes a really versatile defensive team that can probably make some noise in the East. I know this year they were not very good. They were maybe 10, 12 games under 500, but I think if you throw that mix in of some of those talented players, and I think you get a really interesting result. So after that pick, Osama actually jumps ahead 7-6 after the 10th overall pick. So we'll move on to the 11th overall pick, being made by the Denver Nuggets, and that is small forward Doug McDermott, a.k.a. Dougie McBuckets, that's a tongue twister, out of Creighton. So, Osama, who did you have the Nuggets picking here?
Adam taking Joe Harris here. Later on in this draft, they did take Gary Harris, a different Harris, so they were looking for shooting. Joe Harris has been, up until recently, which was a little unfortunate, much more durable than Gary Harris. He just hasn't been able to stay healthy for most of his career. Joe Harris, as we've seen, a lights-out shooter. How many other spot-up shooters can you say are better than Joe Harris in the league? If you catch him in a transition breakaway three, this would have been a good fit, given them depth with Will Barton at shooting guard as well. So I really like Joe Harris here. He would have been playing with they didn't draft earlier. No, they didn't draft earlier. So, yeah, Joe Harris would have been really solid here.
Yeah, I actually made this pick keeping in mind that it was later traded to Chicago. So I took Kyle Anderson here, and I thought, this is the guy that if you're talking about this pick being going to the Bulls, he would fit here in Denver. He'd also fit here for the Bulls, but thinking about him on the Bulls, he's a really nice 3-and-D type of guy. He fits nicely next to Jimmy Buckets, and this is a guy that Thibs would love to have on his team here, Kyle Anderson. So if this pick was the one that was traded over to the Chicago Bulls and Kyle Anderson's the guy they get, that's a guy that Thibs would absolutely love. He's a career 33.9% from threes, averages 1 steal a game, 0.6 blocks. And another surprising metric here is he's 5th in this draft class over in the WARP metric there. But again, how much of that is him being on winning teams early on in his career? But yeah, Kyle Anderson's the pick here for me.
I will agree with you. So I know win shares is definitely impacted by the team that you're on, but I think VORP, which is value over replacement player, I don't think that's team dependent at all. And like you said, he is 5th overall. And you look at the rest of the list, you got Jokic, Embiid, Capella, and Julius Randle ahead of him. And he's tied just about with Zach LaVine at 5th or 6th on this list. The thing is with Kyle Anderson, who also does have a great nickname in slow-mo, is that he's just a winning player. He doesn't do anything particularly really well, but he does a lot of things pretty well. He's a good shooter, good defender. He's reliable. He's got good size. He's durable, as opposed to Joe Harris, who is more of a one-trick pony, which is obviously something that you need. You need spacing. You need shooting. But on a team like either Denver or Chicago, I think Kyle Anderson is a much easier fit, and he's a guy that you can kind of leave on the floor. You don't have to worry about situations or anything like that. You can just play him because he can fit just about anywhere, and he's been part of a lot of winning organizations and winning situations. So with that, we're back. We're tied up again. But Osama, any rebuttals to me picking Kyle Anderson?
Yeah, I didn't pick Kyle Anderson at all. Spoiler alert in this. I just think he is an awful defensive player. He's an underrated offensive player. He's sneaky. But I think a lot of that came in his win shares, came with his time playing in San Antonio, where they won 55. They won 67 games one year. But I think that's a huge part of why he's seen as like a locker room guy. I don't think he's that talented of an offensive player. He doesn't space the floor today, and defensively he's barbecue chicken. But hey, to each their own.
Totally fair. He's also 4th in box score plus minus, but again, that could be part of the team impact there. So we'll move on to the 12th overall pick, and this is the pick that Orlando traded to Philadelphia. The Orlando Magic, a.k.a. Philadelphia 76ers, selected power forward Dario Saric, who also has a great nickname. They call him the homie, Dario, out of Croatia. So, Sulman, who did you have, essentially the 76ers picking 12th overall?
Yes, this is where I had him going Aaron Gordon. And, I was a big Aaron Gordon fan coming into this draft. I loved him. He's showing flashes, but he just never was a consistent enough of a player on the Magic. But, man, put him here on the 76ers, pair him up with LaVine, who I took earlier, and you have probably one of the most entertaining teams in the NBA at this point, even though they're still tanking. And, you have two guys who could fly here. And, Aaron Gordon is a, score-first power forward, but he can kind of grab rebounds, and he's developed into a solid defender. And it's a much better player to have starting on your team versus, an old Drew Gordon, Maba Mute, and Thomas Robinson here. I meant an old Maba Mute, not Drew Gordon. Go ahead, Osama. Sorry. Go ahead.
No worries. Yeah, I went with Bogdanovic here. He was drafted and then spent a couple years developing his game overseas. And when he came back, he was a highly coveted free agent right away. And we saw his impact in Atlanta. He's a great shooter. He's a really good playmaker as well. I think he's a good fit here. I think that it's hard to find these, again, talented stretch players that are versatile because of their size. I like Bogdanovic here.
I went with Aaron Gordon. I don't think that he can drop that far. He is one of the better players in this draft, and I don't think he can drop much further than 12th. And I think on this team, so the 2015-16 Philadelphia 76ers were one of the worst teams in the NBA ever. They won 10 games, and the 2014-15 iteration was not much better. They won 18 games and then 10 games. So I think a team that had Zach LaVine and Aaron Gordon is obviously not going to be that bad. If you look at the names that played for this Sixers team that year, is horrendous. I don't think that I guess it makes sense if you take a guy that maybe you can stash for a little bit. I don't know if that was your intention with Bogdanovich, but I don't think that he's able to make the same impact right away that Aaron Gordon could, especially if you run that two-man game with him and Zach LaVine. I think they immediately become, like Sulman said, one of the most fun teams to watch in the NBA. So I think that gives them gives Gordon, the clear edge here in going to Philadelphia. So what do you say, Osama?
Yeah, I mean, he fell really far down. I don't think I could have picked anybody here still available that would have won this spot.
Yeah, maybe it was smart of Sulman to stash him until we
I kind of intentionally
the
left him at the bottom. I was like, oh man, can I get a Zach LaVine and Aaron Gordon pairing here? Maybe that's a little bit of what's going in my mind, but he definitely was in those other spots considered for sure.
I mean, it would have been a lot of fun, and I think the Philadelphia fans would have been really excited because that era, the process era, was really tough to watch, especially that 10-win season was kind of the scraping the bottom of the barrel when it came to NBA teams and NBA talent. It's like they were definitely trying to lose, and you could see it in the roster development and the roster makeup and the way that they were just basically grabbing guys off the street essentially to play. So this would have ended the process, quote unquote, a little bit earlier. And you can imagine a team with Zach LaVine, Aaron Gordon, and Joel Embiid doing pretty well in the East. So that would have been a lot of fun. Well, I guess Joel Embiid wouldn't be on the team in this universe, but I'm getting all mixed up. All right, next up, with the 13th overall pick, the Minnesota Timberwolves selected shooting guard Zach LaVine out of UCLA, a.k.a. Young Hollywood. So, Osama, who did you have the Timberwolves picking here?
I'm taking Spencer Dinwiddie here. I think that it's a great 1-2 punch with Ricky Rubio as kind of a defensive point guard, not a great shooter. Dinwiddie, one of the quickest first steps in the league, really great at getting to the basket, drawing fouls, getting to the free throw line. He's a great distributor of the basketball too. He's no slouch there. He showed that in his time in Brooklyn when he had a much higher usage rate, and he's a good complementary number 2 next to Luka Doncic right now in Dallas. So I like Spence here.
I actually took Bogdanovich here for the Timberwolves. Clearly they needed some shooting and playmaking, and if this is where they end up also trading Kevin Love and getting Nikola Jokic here instead of Andrew Wiggins, he becomes a really nice pairing there with him. Like all the things Osama said about him earlier, he took some time to develop and he came over and then he played pretty well. He averaged 15 points per game while just playing under 30 a game and shooting over 36% from the three-point line. And so he's a solid rotational player, and he would have given the Wolves some bench depth and shooting here.
I appreciate both picks. I think they both would have made perfect sense here. I like Bogdanovich as a player, but I think for the same reasons, I think that I didn't pick him with the last selection is because of maybe that need to develop and such. So I went with Spencer Dinwiddie. I know he had a kind of a similar thing where he was drafted by Detroit, and it took him a while to get started. He didn't really find his feet until he got to Brooklyn, but I think that was more of an opportunity thing than a talent thing. So I think on a Minnesota team where in this universe they are able to trade for Nikola Jokic, I think that would have been a great pairing. I think we've seen that Jokic can play with just about anybody, but having that fun little two-man game with him and Dinwiddie and Jokic would have been a lot of fun. It would have made them a competitive team. You can just do the same thing with Bogdanovich. You can kind of plug and play either of them, but I think Dinwiddie is able to contribute right away, and I think that we're kind of seeing the best of him on this Dallas team, and I think that for those reasons, I'm going to go with Dinwiddie. So what do you think, Sulman? Or sorry, Osama. Wait, no, Sulman.
Yeah, I could see it maybe a little bit, but I think, to be fair, if you wanted a guy who contributes right away, Dinwiddie is the better pick for sure over Bogdanovich, who takes a couple of years to develop and then comes into the NBA.
Yeah, I think they're pretty similar players in terms of what they can offer a team. So if the only deciding factor is who can play sooner, then I think for that reason you go with Dinwiddie. So, all right. The next pick is the 14th overall pick, which belongs to the Phoenix Suns, and they selected small forward T.J. Warren out of NC State, who they ended up trading for basically nothing later on in his career, which is very strange. But anyway, Sulman, who did you have the Suns picking here?
I had him going Yusuf Nurkic here, and so it was clear the Suns needed a center. They were starting Alex Len here, and I think Nurkic here would have been a great fit. Maybe he should have gone a little bit higher for me here, but Nurkic's career's kind of been slowly going. It's getting worse for him, and in this era where the NBA is moving away from traditional big men, Nurkic is a very traditional big. He scores in the post. He grabs rebounds, right? That's his kind of bread and butter. He's not a great defender by any means. And so I thought, he is a great fit here for the Suns. He's still a talented guy, should be definitely worthy of the lottery selection. And so definitely an upgrade over here over Alex Len.
I actually went with TJ Warren here. I think this was a good pick by the Phoenix Suns. They had plenty of guards already with Goran Dragic, Isaiah Thomas, etc. They had PJ Tucker starting, I believe, at the 3 or the 4 at this point. They had Markieff Morris, or maybe both Morrises. I don't recall. He would have been great here. He's a great bucket getter. Health lately has been an issue for him, but he showed in the bubble he can really light it up. Defensively, he's okay, but he's one of those guys that this far down the draft you're getting a really solid scorer. It was a steal for them. It's a shame they gave him away for nothing.
I'm really liking Sulman's strategy of leaving these really good players for the end because he's able to pick up some valuable points down here at the bottom of this lottery, quote unquote. I understand the reasons to pick TJ Warren. I think he's a good scorer at this level. I do not accept any bubble statistics or bubble talk when it comes to these guys. We've seen that the bubble was not real basketball, in my opinion, real NBA basketball. You don't have dueling 50-point playoff games in any other situation except when they're playing in essentially an open gym. So I'm not going to accept that. And I think it was 3 or 4 games where TJ Warren looked like the best player in the NBA. And he has never done that in any other season of his 8-year career. So for that reason, I am throwing out, again, any bubble statistics or bubble talk and giving Sulman the edge here with Yusuf Nurkic. So what do you think, Osama?
I don't think there's anyone I could have picked here once again that's available that was a better option than Yusuf Nurkic.
It's a smart strategy. He's like the guy in the auction drafts that saves up all his money, doesn't pick anybody for the first 30, 40 minutes, and then spends, I don't know, $100 on Pat Mahomes, whoever it is. Alrighty, so with the last pick of the top half of the 2014 NBA draft, the Atlanta Hawks selected power forward Adrian Payne out of Michigan State. Osama, who did you have the Hawks picking here?
Yeah, their original pick was not a good one. I had them taking Jordan Clarkson here, future 6th man of the year. At this point, you just want solid depth, and this is a guy who throughout his career has shown he's a great spark plug off the bench. They had Jeff Teague, who was an okay starter. He was really the only point guard on the roster. Dennis Schroeder, not a great point guard. I think he would have lost his job to Jordan Clarkson here, maybe after a couple seasons. But a great trio of guards. I think you could have interchanged him at shooting guard with Kyle Korver. They could have really spaced the floor. They won, I think, 60 games that particular season. So they could have used a little more scoring punch. They lost to a Cleveland Cavaliers team without Kevin Love or Kyrie Irving. It could have used a little extra scoring.
I went here TJ Warren. Jordan Clarkson and all these other guys are off the board for me here. But when healthy, TJ Warren's the guy who can get buckets, right? I know he missed 2 years with a foot injury, but he's kind of returned back here this season and kind of looking like the scorer he was before. And his career averages are 15.5 points per game while playing 28.6 minutes per game and shooting 35.7% from threes. And he's a career 50.4% field goal shooter. So I think Warren would have been a great fit here for the Hawks next to Al Horford, Jeff Teague, Kyle Korver. He could have been a little bit of a ISO Joe light Not exactly what everything ISO Joe does, but Warren could do some of that stuff for the Hawks and just give them another scoring punch here that they desperately needed.
So I'm sorry to announce this, but we actually ended up with another tie. So I give Osama the edge here, picking Jordan Clarkson. Maybe there's something to do with our scoring system. Maybe we need to rethink how we're doing this. But the question I have for you is, Osama, do you think that the guys that you picked, the last, 3-4 picks, are better players than Jordan Clarkson? You picked Joe Harris, Bogdanovich, Dinwiddie. Do you think those are all better players than Clarkson, or was it a fit issue that made you pick him a little bit later in the draft?
I think defensively, he's such a liability that it's hard to pick a player that bad on defense any higher than 15. There are some other players on this list that are bad defensively, like Julius Randle, but they more than make up for it with their talent. But here, given his ability, it's not a bad spot for a sixth man of the year to be drafted.
Yeah, and this was the team that did end up winning 60 games, even though they were either swept in the first round or in the second round.
They were swept in the conference finals by a Kyrie Irving-less, Kevin Love-less Cleveland team.
Kevin Love was already out. He had that shoulder injury when they played Boston. I think Olynyk was the one that yanked his shoulder out of his joint, but Kyrie was still on the team, and he was still playing. He was knocked out, I think, in Game 2 of the NBA Finals. So I'm pretty sure Kyrie was still playing. But the point still stands that they were swept in the conference finals despite winning 60 games and being the 1 seed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, so we end up with a tie. How do you guys feel after 2 ties in a row?
I think you
got to start doing negative points.
We're a formidable matchup. I think we mesh well at picking talent, and it's just funny. I think because the first 3 were a tie, that might be why this was the case. It negated a couple of them down the stretch when we were trying to break away, and some man cheated by putting like Michael Jordan or Aaron Gordon at number 10. So that made it a little difficult on my end, regardless of who I picked. But this was a really stacked draft. I think we did a good job of picking guys, and we made our cases.
It was a really stacked draft. That was one of the cool things I really appreciated about it, was just the fact that there was so much talent in the kind of back half of the draft. We probably should have pointed out a little clearer, but there were several second-round picks that made their way into the lottery. Jordan Clarkson was one of them. Jeremy Grant, Spencer Dinwiddie. I'm sure I'm missing some other guys, but there was a few guys.
Jokic.
Yeah, of course, Jokic from, 41st overall, all the way up to 1st overall. So that's quite a jump. Jordan Clarkson was 46th. Jeremy Grant was 39th. Clint Capella was 25th. Joe Harris was 33rd. So a few second-round picks that made their way into the lottery. Are there any guys that were on your bubble that you was hard to leave off?
Not really. I think Dwight Powell was still out there, but that was kind of a close one for me. But that's about it.
Yeah, I would say Dwight Powell, Joe Harris, maybe Alfred Payton, maybe Torrey Craig, who was undrafted here, Maxi Kleber. Some of those guys would have been considered, but yeah, really just a handful of guys.
Yeah, Maxi Kleber and Torrey Craig were the 2 undrafted guys that I mentioned earlier. And then the other one was Rodney Hood. I thought maybe had a chance to be here. He was one of the leaders in the win shares.
Yep. Yeah, that's fair. Rodney Hood, I think if he didn't get hurt, he would have definitely been here for sure.
Yeah, he was part of those, pretty solid Portland teams, and then just fell off pretty hard after injury. So this was a great draft, and I'm apologizing to our listeners for another tie. But I think, like Osama said, I think that the first 3 being the same set the tone for the rest of the draft. I expected a little more variance after pick 2, or even, maybe Embiid going over Jokic, depending on how much you like Embiid. But I guess it's hard to pick against the 2-time, maybe 3-time MVP. But thank you, everyone. We appreciate you guys checking us out. Thank you for checking in with the 4040 Vision podcast on our 2014 NBA redraft. Make sure to follow us on all the social media platforms. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at 4040 Vision Pod. And make sure to subscribe and leave us a review on any of the podcasting platforms that you currently use. We are on Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, just about anywhere you can find a podcast. We are there. Peace out, everybody. Thank you.